So, hi everyone. My name is Sophie, and I'm a back-end Ruby developer at a crowdfunding platform named KissKissBankBank. And I'm about to tell you the story of an haemorrhage. So prepare yourself, because maybe there will be some blood. But don't worry, because there will also be a lot of very cute kittens. So everything's going to be fine. So I think we should start with a bit of context. So at KissKissBankBank, we write our tests with RSpec, and we use CircleCI for our continuous integration. And since we care about our code reliability and sustainability, we do write a lot of tests. And when you write a lot of tests, you may quickly reach that point that I call the "oh my god, this is way too long" point. As you can see here, running our whole test suite could take about 30-35 minutes. And that was not okay, that was driving us crazy. So what we decided to do at this moment was the easier solution, implement parallelism. So in a few words, parallelism is just a very cool feature offered by CircleCI, and it allows you to split up your CircleCI job onto multiple containers. So what we did is to grant 4 containers to our raise test job. And it allows us to go down to 7 minutes instead of 30. So we were very happy. We had not really fastened our test, but that was a good start. And we were very happy about it. But shortly after that, I noticed that one of my test jobs had failed. So I wasn't really surprised at this point, because it happens. But when I checked the job, I was surprised, because I realized that only one test had failed inside of it. And the weird thing was that this test had nothing to do with the code introduced by the tested branch. And the even weirder thing was that this test was running perfectly fine locally. So what I very, very bravely decided to do is to ignore that first red flag, of course. So I just relaunched the job, and the test passed. So this is denial, everyone. And the thing is with denial is that at some point, reality may come back at you in a harsh way. So Reddit reached that point where 8 jobs out of 10 were failing for absolutely no reasons. And that was terrifying, as you can see. So denial was not an option anymore. So at least the situation was crystal clear. We were facing a severe flaky test crisis. So when you're facing this kind of situation, the first thing you probably want to do is to reproduce the failure locally, so it's easier to investigate. And you can do this very easily by just fetching 2 things. The first thing is a list of tests executed in the failed container, and the seed number right here. The seed number will allow you to execute the test in the exact same order than in the failed container. So when you have that, you can just rerun the test with the seed number as an argument and reproduce the failures. And then you can start, investigate. So the first thing I wanted to do is to look at the allegedly flaky test. And as you can see, this test is dead simple. We just create 3 kittens with different colors, and we are then expecting our kitten finder to fetch the right amount of kittens, given a color. So the first thing I wanted to do is to just check if everything was OK before going to battle. So just a very quick reminder about RSpec hook. The before all hook is executed before any example starts, so it's a good way to check if everything is OK before anything starts. So what I was expecting here is no kitten, you know. But guess what? There was a kitten. And that was very confusing to me because, you know, the more kittens there is, the happier I am usually, but not this time. So that was very confusing to me. So I think now we all know that this flaky test crisis was caused by leaking, by bleeding data. So I think it's time to enter the third part of this journey, understand how and why our data was bleeding. So to begin with, let's ask ourselves that very simple question. How are tests supposed not to bleed in the first place? Now, that kind of question you never ask yourself before you get into trouble. So the very first thing I did, very naively, is to check our gem file, test section, and I came across, pretty immediately, on the database cleaner gem. And maybe because of its name, who knows, I had the feeling that the gem was exactly what I was looking for. So, the well-named database cleaner gem has a mission, and its mission is to help you clean up your data between each example you execute. And it comes with 3 different ways of cleaning data, 3 different strategies. The first one relies on the SQL instruction truncate table. The second one goes with delete from. And the last one is a bit different, because it allows you to wrap all the data you will create during an example inside a transaction. And at the end of the example, it rollbacks that transaction. So it seemed to me that it was the best way to do it, because I think it's always easier and faster to roll back a transaction rather than destroy data afterward. So now let's check quickly our database cleaner configuration. So this first line is just setting our global cleaning strategy to transaction. So that goes well with what we just learned. This line is just performing a preventive cleaning before doing anything. So why not? Safety first. And this thing is just the actual cleaning performing between each example. Okay, so, and then there was this last uncommented line talking about transactional fixtures. And that was confusing to me at first because as long as I knew, we were not using raised transactional fixtures. So to be fair, I wasn't really sure about the exact purpose of these features. So I made a very quick research about it. And I firstly discovered that it is a raised native feature. But what I also found out is that it is the exact same thing as database cleaner, transaction cleaning strategy. So if we go back to our database cleaner configuration, and if right now you are asking yourself if it is useful to use transactional fixtures with database cleaner, well, the answer is no. Absolutely not. It's not useful. But don't get me wrong, this was not the reason of our flaky test crisis. We were just doing the same job twice, so it was not very optimal in the end, but this is not what I was really looking for. So now, and on the top of that, the funny thing is that if you go to the database cleaner README page, and if you scroll all the way down to the why section, you will read that one of my motivations for writing this library was to have an easy way to turn on what Rails calls transactional fixtures in my non-Rails active record projects. That was a bit hurtful to read for me. So I felt pretty stupid, I must admit, but it's okay because, fortunately for my ego, it appears that this guy had already been confused with that poorly named feature. So he made a pull request to rename it to transactional tests. So now since Rails 5, this feature has a better name. So I think we can say thank you, Brandon. Okay, now we know how and why data is not supposed to bleed. But ironically, this was not answering my questions at all, because we were cleaning not once our data, but twice. So I had half less reasons to face bleeding data troubles. So my next step was to just check the test executed right before my flaky test. And this test happened to be a bit different from the other on its way to build data. Because a more usual way to build data would be to use this helper, let. But the thing with let is that it is reevaluated at each example, and that's not wrong. But what we were just trying to do here is to build data just once. We're just trying to save some time. And the very next thing that I noticed is that every single time we had a test failing, it was preceded by a test built like this one. And that could not be a coincidence. So I checked the aspect documentation a bit to find out about this kind of hook. And what I found out was that the data created in a before all, or its counterpart before context, are not rolled back. So of course that was my eureka moment, because I understood not only how and why all of this was happening, but why it happened only now and not before. Because locally, our tests were always executed in the exact same order, the alphabetical one. So the leaking test was leaking, but it was okay because it was leaking into nothing. But when we implemented parallelism, the first side effect of it was to mix up our tests. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the leaking test was executed at first, and therefore it was leaking kittens in other tests, causing their failures. So now I think we have all the keys. We know how and why everything is happening. So maybe it's time to start fixing stuff. So the first thing you can do, the first easy thing you can do is to just randomize your tests. It's very easy to do because it's just one line of configuration, and it may help you to see this kind of troubles coming earlier. Now back at our leaking test, the one with the before all hook. The first thing you probably want to do is to use an after all hook and use it to destroy the kitten. But the problem with that is that if you can easily imagine that in your kitten factory, you also create for your kitten a human and maybe some cat toys. And maybe you want all of this data to be destroyed with the kitten. So maybe a better solution, a stronger solution, would be to use database cleaner with another strategies and transaction, of course, but it would work. But in the end, what I think is just, it is always better to treat a disease instead of its symptoms. So what I would like to say is just do not use before all or before context to create data. Unless, of course, you absolutely understand the consequences of what you're doing, of course. So, to resume things a bit, you probably do not need, and I insist on the word probably, but you probably do not need database cleaner in your Rails application, because use transactional tests can do almost all of the job for you. Do not use before context to create data. Always randomly execute your tests. And the last but not the least, read the readmes. Okay, thank you everyone for listening to me. I'd like to thank my amazing Kiss Kiss Bang Bang co-workers, Paris RB for the invitation, and a very special thanks to my cats, because they're very cute.
Okay, so any question?
Did you git blame the file to know who done it?
No, we're good people. We don't get blame. Almost. No, we don't do that. Yeah, yes, there's a question here.
All right, this isn't so much of a question. One of the things you can do with mini-test as opposed to RSpec is you can use mini-test hooks, and you can actually run your entire spec suite in a transaction and run each individual example in a save point, and you get the benefits of transactional testing while still supporting things like creating models, instances in before all. The reason you do it in before all is for performance reasons, so you can keep the same performance and still get the benefits of both worlds.
Yes, I'm not just saying you should do that. If, of course, there is a way for each situation. But most of the time, before all context, hook is used without knowing what's happening next. So I'm not saying you should do that or do this, but just be aware of what's happening next.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And did the use of the same feature twice, the transactional test, had an impact on the performance?
If you use twice...
Like, did the use of both transactional features and the database cleaner strategy have an impact on performance?
I have not really benchmarked it, to be honest. But when we made a pull request to remove database cleaner, I had the impression that we won about 1 minute on our test. We were about 8 minutes, and we could go down to 7. But I did not really benchmark it, so I'm not sure, honestly. But I had really the impression that it changed a bit things.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you.